Hello and welcome to the Nocturnal Chronicles. Imagine a city with almost no land of its own, no mines, no great army, built on a foundation of mud and salt water, standing in a desolate, windswept lagoon. By all logic, this city should never have survived, let alone thrived. And yet, for 1,000 years, this impossible place was one of the richest and most powerful states in the world. This is the story of Venice. So, how did they do it? How did this republic of merchants build a vast maritime empire? How did a city with no natural resources become the gateway between East and West? Tonight, we will tell the epic story of the Venetian Republic, La Surinima. We will explore the genius of its shipbuilders. We will sail with its fleets into the heart of the Crusades. We will follow its merchants as they cornered the world's most lucrative trade in spices and silk. This is a story of incredible ingenuity and political drama. It is also the story of a slow, beautiful decline of a city that was the envy of the world for centuries. But before we set sail, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It is a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I am also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're rejoining me tonight. So, I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away, and let us travel back to a time of marble palaces, silent gondolas, and the scent of eastern spices. The story of Venice begins not with a grand design, but with a desperate flight. In the 5th century AD, the mighty Western Roman Empire was crumbling. The prosperous world of northern Italy was being torn apart by barbarian invasions. The most terrifying of these were the Huns, who swept down from the east under their leader, Ella, leaving ruin in their wake. As their cities burned, the Roman citizens of the region, the Veneti, had to flee for their lives. They sought refuge in the one place a horse-mounted army could not follow. This was the vast and desolate lagoon on the coast of the Adriatic Sea. It was not a paradise. It was a hostile maze of mudflats, saltwater marshes, and small shifting islands. But it offered one singular virtue: safety. The shallow, confusing waterways were a natural fortress. The first Venetians were refugees. They were fishermen, salt pan workers, and farmers who had lost everything. On these small, muddy islands, they began to build a new kind of settlement. Their new community was based not on the soil of the earth, but on the salt of the sea. But how do you build a city of stone on a foundation of mud? The Venetians developed an ingenious method. They drove thousands of long, sharpened wooden piles deep through the soft mud. They pushed them down until they hit a layer of hard-packed clay below. This created a dense underwater forest, a solid and stable foundation. On top of these pilings, they would lay thick platforms of timber. Only then could they begin to construct the stone foundations of their houses, churches, and palaces. They were quite literally building a city on top of an upside-down forest. This unique and challenging environment forged a new kind of people. Their roads were canals. Their wagons were boats. Their lives became oriented entirely towards the sea. This daily struggle with the water taught them pragmatism and resourcefulness. The city that was born from fear was not destined to remain a humble refuge. It was poised to use its unique position to become a power in its own right. As the small settlements of the lagoon grew into a single thriving city, the Venetians faced a new challenge. They were officially part of the distant Byzantine Empire. But in reality, they were independent. They needed a leader to unite them. However, their history was one of fleeing the brutal tyrants and wearing lords of the mainland. Their deepest fear was recreating the very system of one-man rule that they had escaped. Their solution to this dilemma was a political masterpiece, a system of government that would ensure their stability for 1,000 years. In the 8th century, they created the office of the Doge. The title came from the Latin word dux, meaning leader. The choice was deliberate. He was to be a leader, but not a monarch, a prince, but not a king. Critically, he was elected for life by the city's most powerful families. He was not born into the role. The office was a symbol of the state's continuity, but its power was limited from the very beginning. The true power in Venice lay with the wealthy merchant families. Their fortunes were built on maritime trade. Their greatest fear was that an ambitious doge could seize absolute power. A single ruler could create a hereditary dynasty, disrupting the commercial enterprise of the city for his own personal glory. The entire Venetian political system, therefore, evolves into a complex and ingenious machine designed to prevent this. The government was a republic, but it was not a democracy. It was a rigid merchant oligarchy. The foundation of this system was the Great Council. This was an assembly made up of the members of all the noble families of Venice. The Great Council was the ultimate source of authority. It elected the members of all the other smaller councils that ran the city. The Doge himself became a kind of constitutional monarch, bound by an elaborate oath of office. The checks on his power were almost paranoid in their thoroughness. He could not name his own successor. His sons were forbidden from holding public office during his reign. His official mail had to be opened and read by state censors before he was allowed to see it. He could not even leave the city of Venice without the permission of his own councils. To further protect the state from internal threats, the Venetians created one of history's most famous and feared institutions, the Council of Ten. This was a small secretive committee that acted as a state security service. It was tasked with rooting out treason and conspiracies. Its agents were everywhere. Citizens were encouraged to anonymously denounce their neighbors by slipping messages into stone letter boxes placed around the city, the infamous Bodian or lion's mouths. The Venetian system was a paradox. It was a republic built on a foundation of profound institutionalized mistrust. Yet this complex web of checks and balances was incredibly successful. While the rest of Europe was constantly torn apart by the ambitions of feudal kings, Venice enjoyed a stability that was the envy of the world. This stability allowed it to focus its entire energy on a single passion, the accumulation of wealth and the building of a great maritime empire. For the first few centuries of its existence, Venice was not fully independent. It lived in the long shadow of the greatest power in the Christian world, the Byzantine Empire. This was the Eastern Roman Empire. It ruled from its magnificent and fabulously wealthy capital Constantinople. Venice was officially a Byzantine duce. It was a distant and semi-autonomous province, a small part of a vast and ancient empire. This connection shaped the city's early character. Venice was a city of two worlds. It was geographically in the west, but its culture, art, and politics all looked to the east. The breathtaking golden mosaics that began to adorn St. Mark's Basilica were created by Byzantine masters, or in the Byzantine style. This deep connection to Constantinople gave the Venetians unique access to the most sophisticated markets and trade routes in the world. The Venetians were shrewd and pragmatic subjects. They used a relationship with the empire to their own advantage. Their growing navy, the best in the region, often served as a mercenary fleet for the Byzantine emperor. The emperor frequently needed help to fight off Norman and Arab threats in the Mediterranean. Venice provided this vital naval support, but it always came at a price. The most important payment came in the year 1082. The Byzantine Emperor Alexio I Comnenus was desperate for Venetian help against an invasion. In return for the service of their fleet, he issued an imperial decree known as a Golden Bull. This decree granted Venetian merchants staggering trading privileges throughout the Byzantine Empire. They were allowed to trade completely tax-free in most of the empire's major ports, including Constantinople itself. They were even given their own district and docks in the capital. This was a massive economic coup for Venice. It gave them a huge competitive advantage over their rivals, like Genoa and Pisa. But it also slowly began to the Byzantine economy. The empire was now deprived of huge amounts of tax revenue. The relationship began to change. The Venetian servants were now becoming richer and more powerful than their Byzantine masters. Over the next century, this imbalance led to growing tension and resentment. The people of Constantinople grew to hate the arrogant and wealthy Venetian merchants, who now dominated their city as commerce. This hostility sometimes erupted into violent riots and massacres. The old alliance had curdled into a relationship of deep mutual suspicion and bitter economic rivalry. By the end of the 12th century, the bond was completely broken. Venice was no longer a servant, but a powerful and independent competitor. The Venetians saw the weakening Byzantine Empire as both a commercial threat and an immense opportunity for plunder. They knew the secrets of Constantinople's wealth, and they knew the weaknesses of its defenses. This long and complicated history of service, economic domination, and bitter resentment is the crucial backstory for the shocking events that were to come. As Venice grew in power and distanced itself from its old master, the Byzantine Empire, its leaders, knew the city needed a new spiritual heart. A great power required a great patron saint, one whose prestige could rival the apostles of Rome and Constantinople. Their current patron was a minor Byzantine figure, a constant reminder of their former to be truly independent. Venice needed a relic of the highest order, and so they set their sights on the body of Saint Mark, the evangelist himself. There was just one problem. The sacred remains of Saint Mark were housed in a shrine in Alexandria, Egypt, a city then under the control of the Muslim. In the year 828 AD, two Venetian merchants, Barro de Malamocco and Rustico di Torello, embarked on an audacious and sacrilegious mission. Their goal was a holy theft, an act of pious larceny, to bring the evangelist home to their city. The two merchants sailed to Alexandria. Through a combination of bribery and persuasion, they convinced the keepers of the shrine to let them take the saint's body. They claimed they were saving the holy relic from potential desecration by the local rulers, giving their heist a veneer of religious duty. Their greatest challenge, however, was smuggling the body past the caif's customs officials at the port. It was here that the merchants displayed the cunning and pragmatism that would come to define their republic. They placed the saint's body in a large basket and covered it with layers of pork and cabbage leaves. As the story is told, when the Muslim officials, who consider pork to be unclean, came to inspect the cargo, they recoiled in disgust. They waved the ship through without a proper search. The daring plan had worked perfectly. The arrival of St. Mark's body in Venice was a moment of profound transformation. The entire city erupted in celebration, no longer a cultural province of Byzantium. Venice was now a major pilgrimage destination. Its sacred authority could rival that of Rome itself. The magnificent golden St. Mark's Basilica was commissioned to be the new permanent home for the evangelist's remains, becoming the spiritual and political heart of the Venetian state. With their new patron saints came a new powerful symbol. The traditional icon for St. Mark the Evangelist is a winged lion. Venice immediately adopted this as its own. The Lion of St. Mark, often depicted holding a book, became the official symbol of the Republic. It was stamped on coins, flown on the banners of their warships, and carved into the gates of every city they conquered. The theft of a saint's body was the ultimate declaration of Venetian ambition. It was a sacred act of lacers that severed their old ties and laid the divine foundation for the independent empire to come. Venice now had a stable government and a divine protector. It also possessed a growing naval power, a fleet strong enough to be hired as mercenaries by the Byzantine emperor himself. But what was the source of this incredible maritime might? The answer, the true physical heart of the Republic, was forged in a single, vast, and highly secret location. Tucked away in the eastern corner of the city, behind high red brick walls and guarded towers, lay the Venetian arsenal. It was not merely a shipyard. It was the largest and most efficient industrial complex in Europe, centuries ahead of its time. The genius of the arsenal was its revolutionary approach to production. In an age where ships were typically built one at a time, the Venetians pioneered the principles of the modern assembly line. The process began with the mass production of standardized interchangeable parts within the arsenal sprawling complex. Dedicated workshops were filled with highly skilled workers known as the arsenal. They did nothing but produce identical components: oars, rudders, masts, and vast quantities of rope. These parts were then stored by the thousands in massive warehouses, ready for use at a moment's notice. The assembly of a ship took place along a production canal that flowed through the heart of the complex. A bare, pre-built hull would be towed into the canal at one end. As it moved down the waterway, it would stop at a series of stations. At each stop, different guild of specialized arsenal would swarm the vessel. They fitted it with the specific parts they had mastered. One team would install the rowers' benches. Another would step the mast and rig the sails. In the final stages, the ship would be armed first with crossbows, and later with the powerful new technology of cannons cast in the arsenal's own fountain. This system was so astonishingly efficient that it was said of visiting dignitary in A famous demonstration witnessed a new war galley being fully assembled and armed in the time it took him to eat a leisurely dinner. At the peak of its power, Venice could outfit and launch a fully equipped warship in a single day. This incredible speed gave the Republic a strategic advantage that no rival could match. In times of war, they could generate a massive fleet almost instantly, stunning their enemies with the sheer scale and speed of their mobilization. The Arsenati who worked here were an elite and privileged class. They were state employees with guaranteed lifelong jobs, pensions, and even housing for their families. In return for this security, they were fiercely loyal and sworn to secrecy. They were the guardians of the state's most vital military and industrial secrets. The arsenal was a fortress, not just against enemy fleets, but against the prying eyes of rival powers desperate to steal the secrets of Venice's industrial might. The arsenal was far more than a shipyard. It was the physical manifestation of Venetian ingenuity and pragmatism. It was the factory that allowed a small city built on mud and salt water to project immense naval force across the Mediterranean. The political stability of the Doge's palace provided the will, but the industrial might of the arsenal provided the weapon. The power forged in the dark halls of the arsenal was put on magnificent display for the entire world to see. This happened on one special day each year, the Feast of the Ascension. On this day, the city celebrated its most important and unique state ceremony. It was a ritual that perfectly captured the soul of the Republic. It was called the Marriage to the Sea. The centerpiece of the festival was the Due State barge, the Busta. This was no war galley. It was a floating palace, a breathtaking masterpiece of Venetian craftsmanship. The ship was immense, a double-decked vessel propelled by the arsenal's most skilled oarsmen. Its entire surface was covered in elaborate mythical carvings, all heavily gilded with pure gold leaf. When the Buster was brought out of its special shelter, it was said to look like a golden mountain floating on the water. On the morning of the festival, the Doge would board the Buster. He was dressed in his finest ceremonial robes, along with the highest officials and foreign ambassadors. From there, he led a grand procession of hundreds of boats out into the lagoon. It was a spectacle of incredible pomp and civic pride. The entire city would turn out to watch the golden barge, followed by a flotilla of brightly decorated gondolas and private yachts. The air filled with music, the pealing of church bells, and the cheers of the Venetian people. The procession's destination was the Leo Inlet. This was the point where the calm waters of the lagoon meet the open expanse of the Adriatic Sea. Here, the flotilla would fall silent, and the Doge would perform the ancient and sacred ritual. He would take a consecrated golden ring. He held it aloft for all to see. Then, he would recite the solemn, unchangeable Latin vow desponsus, Ter insignum ver perpetuum, which means we marry you, our sea, as a sign of true and perpetual dominion. With those words, he would drop the golden ring into the waves. The act was a yearly renewal of the sacred contract at the heart of the city's existence. It was a prayer for the safety of their sailors and the prosperity of their trade. But it was also a powerful statement of political reality. It declared to the world that the Adriatic was Venice's territory. It announced that the sea was their private highway and that they were its undisputed master. For the Venetians, this was no mere metaphor. Their city was born from the water, protected by the water, and made rich by the water. The sea was their farm, their fortress, and their entire reason for being to be married to the sea was to state the fundamental truth of their world. This magnificent ceremony was the ultimate expression of the Venetian soul. It was a golden spectacle that proclaimed the source of all their power and glory. At the dawn of the 13th century, Pope Innocent III declared the Fourth Crusade, a new holy war to sail to the Holy Land and reclaim Jerusalem. The feudal lords of France and the Holy Roman Empire answered the call. They assembled a magnificent army of knights and soldiers, but to strike at the heart of Muslim power in Egypt, they needed a fleet. There was only one city in the world that could provide it. Venice, the leader of Venice at this time, was one of the most remarkable figures of the Middle Ages. His name was Doge Enrico de. He was an old man, well into his 90s, and he was blind. Yet his mind was as sharp as any man half his age, and his ambition for the glory of Venice was boundless. The Crusader envoys arrived and made their request. They needed a fleet to transport 33,000 men and 4,500 horses. Dandilo and the Venetians drove a hard bargain. They agreed to suspend all their normal commercial activities for over a year. They would dedicate the entire industrial might of the arsenal to this one massive project. The price for this service was a staggering 85,000 silver marks. The Crusaders agreed, and Venice went to work. In the summer of 1202, the Crusader army arrived at the Leo of Venice. A crisis immediately erupted. The army was far smaller than promised. Thousands of knights had taken different routes or dropped out. As a result, they could only pay a fraction of the enormous agreed-upon price. The situation was a disaster for both sides. A massive armed foreign army was now trapped on an island in the lagoon, unable to fulfill its holy vow. And Venice was on the brink of bankruptcy, its expensive new fleet sitting idle in the harbor. It was in this moment of crisis that the blind Doge Dandolo revealed his cunning genius. He made a proposal to the desperate Crusaders. They could, he suggested, pay off the rest of their debt. Not in silver, but in service. Their first target, he announced, would not be Egypt. It would be the Christian city of Zara, a trading rival of Venice on the Dalmatian coast. The Crusaders were aghast. He had taken a sacred oath to fight the enemies of Christ. Now they were being asked to attack a fellow Christian city for the commercial benefit of Venice. Many protested this blatant hijacking of their holy mission. Some abandoned the crusade in disgust, but the majority, trapped in debt and desperate, reluctantly agreed. To seal the deal, the aged Enrico Dandolo performed a masterful act of political theater. During a great mass in St. Mark's Basilica, he declared that he, despite his age and blindness, would personally take the cross and lead the crusade. The great fleet, paid for with Venetian silver and Crusader desperation, finally set sail. Dandolo's great gamble had paid off. He had successfully diverted the entire Fourth Crusade onto a new, unforeseen, and controversial path, replacing its sacred purpose with the cold, hard logic of Venetian ambition. And so, in the autumn of 1202, the great Crusader and Venetian fleet appeared before the harbor of Zara. When the people of the city saw the massive armada, they were terrified. They were devout Catholics. They hung crucifixes and banners of the Pope from their city walls. They pleaded with the Crusaders not to attack their fellow Christians. The Pope himself had explicitly forbidden the act. He had threatened the entire army with excommunication. But the leaders of the crusade were trapped by their debt, and the blind Doge Dandolo was relentless. For Venice, this was business. The siege began. After a brief and brutal assault, the city of Zara fell to the Crusader army. The knights and soldiers, having now paid a portion of their debt in service, entered and sacked the city. It was a grim prelude to what was to come. The army wintered in the conquered city. It was during this cold and tense winter that the destiny of the crusade was changed forever. A new player arrived. He was a young, exiled Byzantine prince named Alexios Angelos. He made the Crusader leaders a breathtaking offer. He asked them to sail to Constantinople and help him take the throne. In return, he would pay their entire debt. To Venice. He would also finance their onward journey to Egypt and submit the Orthodox Church to the authority of the Pope. For the French and German knights, this was a tempting justification. They could restore a rightful heir and unite the Church, all while solving their financial crisis. For the Venetians, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. Constantinople, the Queen of Cities, was the wealthiest metropolis in the world. It was also Venice's greatest commercial rival. The chance to place a friendly, indebted emperor on its throne was a prize for which Enrico Dandolo was willing to risk everything. In the summer of 1203, the Crusader fleet arrived before the immense legendary walls of Constantinople. The citizens of the world, as greatest Christian capital, were stunned to see a fellow Christian army at their gates. The initial assault was successful. The usurper on the throne fled. The young Prince Alexios was installed as co-emperor, but the triumph was short-lived. The new emperor quickly discovered that the city's treasury was empty. He was unable to pay the vast sums he had promised. Tensions exploded. The Crusader army camped outside the walls felt betrayed. They watched as a popular uprising overthrew their puppet emperor, who was brutally murdered. With no hope of payment, the Crusaders made a fateful decision. They would take their payment by force. In April of 1204, they unleashed a full large-scale assault. The Venetian fleet played a crucial role. Their ships acted as floating siege towers, allowing them to storm the sea walls. After a desperate battle, the defenses were breached. The Crusader army poured into the wealthiest city in Christendom. What followed was one of the most shameful events in medieval history. It was the Great Sack of Constantinople. For 3 days, the city was subjected to an orgy of looting, destruction, and murder. Palaces and churches were stripped of their priceless holy relics and ancient treasures. The great library was burned. Magnificent bronze statues were torn down and melted for coin. Venice played a shrewd and calculated game in the division of the spoils. The French knights took land, but Venice took the prizes that mattered most for a maritime empire. They looted the famous for bronze horses, a future symbol for St. Mark's. They took control of 3/8 of Constantinople itself, and they claimed a string of strategic ports and islands throughout the Byzantine Empire, including the crucial island of Crete. The Fourth Crusade never reached the Holy Land. It had instead shattered the ancient Christian Byzantine Empire. It had also enriched Venice beyond its wildest dreams. With the wealth of Constantinople in their vaults and its most strategic ports under their control, Venice was no longer just a powerful city-state. It was now a true empire, the undisputed master of the Eastern Mediterranean. In the chaotic aftermath of the sack of Constantinople, the French and German Crusader lords scrambled to carve out feudal kingdoms for themselves. They claimed vast tracts of land from the fallen Byzantine Empire. The Venetians, however, played a much more calculated and strategic game. They had no interest in governing large, rebellious inland populations or managing feudal estates. Their ambition was not for land. It was for the sea itself. From the spoils of the fallen empire, they meticulously crafted a new kind of empire, one perfectly suited to a republic of merchants, the Stowe, the state of the sea, while the other crusaders claimed their share in territory. Venice, its share in trade routes. Their strategy was to create a long, unbroken chain of fortified ports and islands that would act as stepping stones. It was a maritime highway stretching all the way from the Venetian lagoon to the Black Sea. It was a string of pearls, where each pearl was a strategic harbor, a naval base, and a commercial outpost. This would guarantee the safety and supremacy of Venetian shipping. From the partition of the Byzantine Empire, Venice acquired a series of key locations, secured the most important ports along the coast of Greece. They took control of the Cyclades Islands in the Ion, but their greatest prize was the massive and strategically vital island of Crete. Known to the Venetians as the Kingdom of Candia, Crete became their most important overseas colony. Its position allowed them to dominate the shipping lanes of the entire Eastern Mediterranean. It served as a crucial naval base and a source of valuable goods for centuries. This was not an empire of settlement. It was a commercial and military machine. Each island and port in the Stomer served a specific purpose. They were safe harbors where Venetian merchant geese could rest, resupply, and shelter from storms and pirates. They were naval stations where squadrons of Venetian warships could be based. This allowed them to police the seal lanes and project power far from home. And they were commercial centers where Venetian merchants would collect local goods to be funneled back to the markets of Venice. Life in these colonies was typically overseen by a Venetian governor. He was a nobleman sent from the city to rule over the local, mostly Greek population. It was often a pragmatic, business-like form of rule. It was more concerned with collecting taxes and ensuring the smooth flow of trade than with changing the local culture. The Stowe de Mar was the ultimate expression of the Venetian worldview. It was an empire designed by merchants, for merchants. Every island and every harbor was chosen not for its size, but for its strategic and commercial value. This network of naval bases and trading posts was the hardened skeleton that supported their vast commercial body. It allowed them to control the flow of wealth from the east back to the heart of their city with unparalleled efficiency and security. They had built their city on the water, and now they had built their empire on it as well. The Venetian empire of ports and islands was designed to funnel the riches of the east to the west, but one Venetian's journey went far deeper beyond the familiar trade routes to the very source of those riches. His name was Marco Polo, and his story would become the most famous travelogue in history. The adventure began in 1271. Marco, then just a 17-year-old boy, set out from Venice with his father and uncle. They were merchants, and this was an ambitious trading mission. Their journey was not a swift voyage by sea, but a long, arduous trek overland, following the legendary network of paths known as the Silk Road. For 3.5 years, they traveled, crossing the mountains of Anatolia, the deserts of Persia, and the towering Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world. Finally, they arrived at their destination, the opulent, almost mythical court of Kublai Khan, the Mongol Emperor of China. The Khan was a sophisticated and curious ruler, and he was fascinated by these strange men from a distant land. He took a particular liking to the young Marco Polo. He found him to be intelligent and a keen observer. For the next 17 years, Marco Polo did not just trade, he became an honored emissary and official in the Khan's vast and powerful empire. He traveled all over China on the Khan's business, seeing wonders that no European had ever witnessed before. He saw cities of immense size, far grander than anything in Europe. He saw the burning of black stone or coal for heat. He saw the use of paper money, a concept completely alien to the West. He witnessed the workings of the efficient Mongol postal system and heard tales of the distant islands of Japan. After 24 years away from home, the Polos finally received the Khan's permission to return. Their journey back was just as perilous, this time by sea through the South China Sea and across the Indian Ocean. When they finally arrived back in Venice in 1295, they were almost unrecognizable, dressed in tattered Mongol clothing. Legend says that at first their own family did not believe it was them. To prove their story, they cut open the seams of their rough clothes, and a river of priceless jewels, rubies, sapphires, and diamonds hidden from pirates and bandits poured out onto the table. Marco Polo's incredible adventure had one final ironic twist. A few years after his return, Venice was at war with its great rival, Genoa. Marco, now a wealthy man, commanded his own galley in the Venetian fleet at the Battle of Cazola in 1298. The Venetians were crushed, and Marco Polo was captured and thrown into a Genoese prison. It was there in that prison cell that he met a writer of romances named Rustichello Disa. To pass the time, Marco Polo dictated the entire story of his incredible journey to his cellmate. The resulting book, The Travels of Marco Polo, became an instant sensation. Though many at the time dismissed it as The Million Lies, a collection of fantastic fables, it was the first detailed and realistic account of the Far East that Europe had ever seen. It would inspire future generations of explorers, including Christopher Columbus himself, and would forever cement the legacy of a Venetian merchant who had journeyed to the end of the world and back. Venice had built an empire, and its merchants, like Marco Polo, had journeyed to the ends of the earth. But the great rivalry with Genoa, their powerful twin on the other side of Italy, was not yet settled. One final brutal war was needed to decide the true master of the Mediterranean. This was the War of Coda, the last and most desperate struggle between the two lions of the sea. The war began in 1378. In a brilliant and daring move, the Genoese fleet achieved what no enemy had ever done before. They sailed into the Venetian lagoon itself. They smashed through the city's outer defenses and captured the strategic port of Chioggia, at the southern end of the lagoon. For the first time in its history, Venice was directly threatened, its own waterways occupied by a hostile fleet. This was the Republic's darkest hour. The enemy was at the very gates of the city. The Genoese fleet established a blockade, cutting Venice off from the sea, its only source of food and wealth. The city began to starve. The Genoese admiral, full of confidence, sent a message to the Venetian Doge. He declared he would not grant peace until he had tamed the line of St. Mark itself, a promise of total conquest. In this moment of desperation, the Venetians mounted one of the most remarkable comebacks in naval history. They rallied every ship and every man they had left. They freed their best admiral, Veto Pisani, from prison to lead them. He proposed a supremely audacious gamble to blockade the blockaders. Under the cover of night, the Venetian fleet sailed south. They reached the narrow sea channels that led out of the Chioggia lagoon, the only escape route for the Genoese fleet. There they sank old, heavy ships filled with stone, completely sealing the exits. The entire Genoese fleet, the victors of a moment ago, was now trapped inside the very harbor they had just conquered. The situation was completely reversed. The siege of Venice became the siege of Chiota. For 6 grueling months, the Venetians held their position, cutting off all food and supplies to the trapped Genoese sailors. It became a brutal war of attrition. Finally, starving and with no hope of rescue, the once mighty Genoese fleet was forced into a humiliating and total surrender. The victory was absolute. The War of Kodia had broken the back of Genoese sea power forever, while Genoa would remain a financial center. Its challenge for maritime supremacy was over. Venice now stood alone, the undisputed master of Mediterranean trade. Having vanquished its greatest rival in a war it had almost lost, the Republic was now truly free to enter its golden age. Venice now stood alone as the master of the Mediterranean. Its victory over Genoa had secured its trade routes. Its empire of ports and islands was a perfectly designed machine. This machine was created for a single purpose: to control the most valuable and profitable trade on Earth. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, true wealth was not just gold. It was spice. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg were commodities of almost unimaginable value. They were preservatives for meat, essential ingredients in medicine, and the ultimate status symbol for the rich. Their origins in the far-off spice islands of the East were a complete mystery to most Europeans. This made them seem magical and exotic. A small sack of peppercorns could be worth more than a man's entire lifetime of wages. A pound of nutmeg was often valued more highly than a pound of gold. For centuries, Venice positioned itself as the sole gatekeeper of this incredibly lucrative trade. The journey of the spices was a long and perilous one. They were carried by Arab and Indian sailors across the Indian Ocean. They were then moved by long camel caravans across the deserts of Arabia. They finally arrived at the great Mediterranean ports of Alexandria in Egypt and Aleppo in Syria. It was here at the threshold of Europe that the Venetians were waiting. Through a combination of advantageous diplomatic treaties with the sultans of Egypt, the raw power of their navy, and their network of strategic island colonies, Venice established a virtual monopoly. No other European power could effectively buy spices at their source. The lifeblood of this trade was the great Venetian merchant galley. These massive, primarily sail-powered ships, often traveling in protected convoys, would arrive in Alexandria laden with the goods of Europe like Flemish wool and German iron. They would exchange these for the precious cargo from the East. Then began the triumphant journey home, their holds filled with the fragrant, priceless dust that was the foundation of the Republic's fortune. The arrival of a spice convoy in Venice was a moment of citywide celebration. The ships would unload their cargo at the bustling markets of the Rio, the air filled with the exotic scents of the Orient. Here, under the watchful eyes of state inspectors, every sack of pepper was weighed, taxed, and sold to the merchant houses of the city. From the warehouses of Venice, the spices were then distributed to the rest of the continent. The immense profits from this monopoly funded the splendor of the city. It paid for the magnificent marble palaces that lined the Grand Canal. It paid for the breathtaking artworks of Titian and Verese. It paid for the powerful war fleets that were built in the arsenal. The city of Venice, a glittering jewel on the water, was a city built on a mountain of spice. Venice was now at the peak of its wealth. Its maritime empire funneled the riches of the East into its coffers. But this success created a new and dangerous vulnerability. For centuries, the Republic's only real threats had come from the sea. This was a challenge they had mastered. Now, a new danger was growing on their very doorstep. Powerful and aggressive states were consolidating on the Italian mainland. The greatest of these was the Duchy of Milan, ruled by the ambitious and expansionist Visconti family. Their goal was to conquer all of northern Italy. The leaders of Venice realized that their lagoon was no longer a perfect defense. A powerful enemy controlling the shore could cut off their vital food supplies. They could also sever the land trade routes that ran from Venice over the Alps and to the rest of Europe. The sea had made them rich, but the land could make them starve. This new threat sparked a fierce political debate within the Doge's palace. One faction of nobles, the traditionalists, argued that Venice was a creature of the sea. They warned that getting involved in the treacherous and expensive land wars of Italy would be a disastrous mistake. It would betray the city's true nature. The other faction, the expansionists, argued that they had no choice. To remain secure, Venice had to control its own backyard. It needed to forge a deep defensive buffer zone on the mainland. After a long struggle, The expansionist party won the debate. In the early 15th century, under the leadership of Doge Francesco, Venice made a radical shift in its grand strategy. It began a long and costly series of wars to conquer the territory behind it. This was the birth of the Stadtterror, the state of the land. The campaign of conquest was swift and successful at first. Through a combination of skillful diplomacy and decisive military action, Venice took control of a series of nearby cities. They captured Padua, then Vicenza, and finally, the great city of Verona. This expansion gave them control of the major rivers and the fertile farmlands of the Veneto region. For the first time, Venice had secured its own food supply. This was a monumental change for the Republic. Venice was no longer just a maritime empire. It was now a major Italian land power as well. This new land empire would bring the city great security and new resources. But it would also embroil Venice in a century of brutal, complex, and expensive land wars. This was a very different kind of conflict from the naval battles they had mastered, and it would demand a new kind of soldier to fight it. Venice had committed itself to a new future, one of conquest on the Italian mainland. But the Republic of Merchants faced a serious problem. Its citizens were sailors and shipbuilders, not professional land soldiers. To fight its wars on the Terrema, Venice, like the other great Italian states, turned to the masters of Renaissance warfare. A Condoiro was a professional mercenary captain. He did not fight for patriotism or a king. He fought for a contract, the Conde. This contract specified his pay, the number of troops he would provide, and the duration of his service. These captains were entrepreneurs of violence. They ran their own private armies, complete with heavily armored cavalry and infantry. They were often minor nobles who saw warfare as a path to wealth, power, and fame. This system created a unique style of warfare. It was a business. The Conde's most valuable assets were his experienced soldiers and his expensive war horses. He was often reluctant to risk these assets in bloody, decisive battles that could wipe out his army and his livelihood. Warfare often became a slow, complex game of maneuver, long sieges, and strategic skirmishes. The goal was to outsmart your opponent and capture territory with minimal losses. Betrayal was also common. A captain might switch sides in the middle of a war if a rival state offered him a better contract. The pragmatic Venetians used these mercenaries because they had to, but they deeply distrusted them. The Republic's greatest fear was that a successful and popular general could become a military dictator. He could use his army to overthrow the state, as it happened in other Italian cities. Because of this, Venice constantly monitored its own generals. They sent political officials to watch over them in the field and report back to the dreaded Council of Ten. The most famous and tragic example of this mistrust is the story of the great General Francesco Busoni, known as He was a brilliant condier originally in the service of Venice, great rival Milan. Venice hired him away with a massive contract, and he won several major victories for the Republic. He became a celebrated hero, but the state soon began to suspect his loyalty. They questioned his lack of aggression in later campaigns, suspecting he was secretly in contact with his former employers in Milan. In 1432, the Venetian government acted with chilling precision. They invited their celebrated general back to the city. Supposedly to discuss future strategy, Carmagnola was welcomed with great honor at the Doge's palace. But as he entered a side chamber, the doors were locked behind him. He was arrested by order of the Council of Ten. After a secret trial for treason, he was found guilty. He was led out into the Ponte San Marco, between the two great columns, and publicly beheaded. The story of Carmagnola was a brutal and unmistakable message to all who would serve the Republic. Venice would use the Condieri to conquer its land empire, but it would never, ever trust them. This was the violent and paranoid world of Renaissance land warfare. It was the price Venice had to pay to forge and defend its Stadtterror, its empire on the land. But the story of Venice is one of constant contrast. While its hired generals fought grimly on the dusty plains of Italy, the city they were protecting was being transformed by a river of gold flowing from the east. This incredible wealth didn't just fund wars, it created a unique and magnificent way of life. The great spice convoys brought unimaginable wealth into Venice. This wealth transformed the city, funding its art and architecture. It also shaped the daily life on its unique watery streets. And no symbol is more connected to the life of the city than its most famous vessel, the gondola. For centuries, the canals of Venice were its roads. Everything and everyone moved by boat. The gondola evolved as the perfect vehicle for this unique environment. Its design is a work of subtle genius. It is long and slender to navigate the narrowest canals. It has a flat bottom to clear the shallow waters. And most cleverly, its hull is asymmetrical, built with a slight curve. This asymmetry is what allows a single gondolier, standing at the stern, with a single or two, propel the boat. In a straight line, the gondolas themselves were a powerful and respected part of Venetian life. They were members of a historic and tightly controlled guild. They knew the secrets of the city's labyrinthine canal network better than anyone. They were the city's taxi drivers, its confidants, and the silent witnesses to its many secrets. During the height of the Renaissance, the gondola became a symbol of status. Wealthy, noble families competed fiercely to own the most lavishly decorated boat. They adorned their gondolas with rich, colorful fabrics, intricate carvings, and gleaming gold leaf. The canals were filled with these magnificent floating displays of private wealth, a stark contrast to the Republic's ideal of public modesty. The state decided to put a stop to this ostentatious competition. In 1562, the Venetian government passed a sumptu law. This was a law designed to curb extravagant spending. It decreed that all gondolas, with the exception of a few ceremonial state boats, must be stripped of their decorations and painted a uniform, simple black. This law perfectly encapsulated the Venetian mindset. It enforced a public image of sober Republican equality, forcing the city's powerful nobles to conceal their immense wealth behind a veil of uniformity. The Black Gondola became an icon. It was a symbol of the unique culture of Venice, a city of outward modesty that hired a world of private luxury. This law controlling even the color of a boat was a perfect example of the Venetian state's power over the public and private lives of its citizens. And this obsession with control extended from the canals into the most sacred and dangerous realm of all, religious belief. Across Renaissance, Europe, the Catholic Church had a powerful and feared tool for enforcing its doctrine. It was called the Inquisition, a special court tasked with finding and punishing heresy, beliefs that contradicted the official teachings of the Church. But the Republic of Venice, as always, did things its own way. While it was a devout Catholic state, it famously insisted on running its own state-controlled inquisition. The reason for this was pure pragmatism. The Venetian state was built on international trade. Its city was a cosmopolitan melting pot. It was filled with foreign merchants, including German Lutherans, Orthodox Greeks, and Jews. An overly zealous Rome-controlled inquisition could have triggered diplomatic incidents. It could have disrupted the vital trade relationships that were the lifeblood of the city. For Venice, commercial stability was just as important as religious purity. The Venetian system was unique. The tribunal itself was composed of religious figures. This included the Papal Nuno and the Patriarch of Venice. But there was a crucial difference. 3 lay observers were required to be present at every trial. These were Venetian noblemen, appointed by the state, known as the Savio. These observers had no vote in the verdict, but their presence ensured that the state monitored all proceedings. The interests of the Republic were always protected. They could suspend a trial if they felt it was politically motivated or damaging to Venice. As a result, the Venetian Inquisition was generally considered less brutal. It was more pragmatic than its counterparts in Spain or Rome. Its focus was on public repentance and conformity, not on mass execution. While it did prosecute people for heresy, its methods were always tempered by the state's need for stability. They were especially concerned with the city's large German merchant community. They feared the spread of Protestantism could become a source of political unrest. This independent streak led to constant tension with the papacy in Rome. The Pope saw Venice's state-controlled inquisition as a challenge to his authority. This was part of a larger pattern for the Republic. Venice consistently prioritized its own state interests over the demands of the Church, a stance that was unique among the Italian states. The Venetian Inquisition is a perfect example of the Republic's unique character. It was a city that managed to be both deeply pious and fiercely independent. It found a way to balance the demands of faith with the practical necessities of running a global commercial empire. Even in the sacred and terrifying matter of heresy, The final loyalty of Venice was to the state and to the stability of the Republic. But that hard-won stability, so carefully guarded from within, was about to face its greatest ever threat from the outside. Venice's golden age of commercial supremacy was not destined to last forever. Throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, a formidable new power rose in the east, the Ottoman Empire. The fall of Constantinople to the Sultan in 1453 was a seismic shock to the Venetian world. It placed a mighty and aggressive empire in direct control of their vital trade routes to the Black Sea. What followed was a century of relentless, draining warfare. One by one, Venice's valuable ports and islands in the Ion. Its start came under attack. The Republic found itself in a constant, incredibly expensive struggle to defend its maritime empire from the might of the Ottomans. This long conflict reached a breaking point in 1570. The Ottomans launched a massive invasion of the rich and strategically vital Venetian held island of Cyprus. Venice, knowing it could not face the full might of the Ottoman navy alone, sent desperate pleas across Europe for a new crusade. In response, a holy league of Christian powers was formed. The fleets of Spain, the Papal States, and other Italian states joined with Venice to confront the Turkish menace. The result was the largest naval battle fought in the Western world since antiquity, the Battle of Lentu. In the autumn of 1571, the two colossal fleets met in the Gulf of Patras, off the coast of Greece. The sight must have been breathtaking. On one side, over 200 Ottoman galleys, their oars churning the sea. On the other, the combined Christian fleet of a similar size, a forest of masts and banners. This would be the last great battle in history to be fought primarily by oar-powered galleys. At the heart of the Venetian fleet were 6 revolutionary new warships. They were called Galacet. These were massive hybrid ships, taller than a normal galley. They were packed with a formidable number of cannons acting as floating fortresses. As the battle began, the Venetian galleases were towed in front of the main Christian line. They unleashed a devastating barrage of cannon fire. This smashed the Ottoman formation before the main fleets even clashed. What followed was a brutal, chaotic, and incredibly bloody clash. For hours, the two fleets grappled in a swirling battle. The sea was filled with the crash of ramming ships and the roar of cannons. G's would lock together. The fighting became a desperate hand-to-hand struggle on the blood-slicked decks. The Christian fleet slowly gained the upper hand. Their superior firepower made the difference. Venetian and Spanish soldiers boarded the Ottoman flagship. In a climactic struggle, they captured the vessel and killed the Ottoman admiral. The sight of their admiral's banner falling sent a wave of panic through the Turkish fleet. The battle turned into a rout. The victory at Lentu was absolute and overwhelming. The Ottoman fleet was annihilated. Thousands of Christian galley slaves were freed from their oars. News of the victory was met with ecstatic celebration across Europe. For Venice, it was a moment of immense triumph and pride. It was their last great heroic victory on the world stage. However, the triumph was short. The Holy League soon fell apart due to political infighting. Venice, left to face the Ottomans alone, was eventually forced to cede the island of Cyprus in a treaty. The great victory at Lentu was a glorious military achievement, but it could not reverse the long, slow tide of history that was now running against the Republic. The true threat to Venice's future was not an Ottoman fleet, but a new map of the world being drawn by the daring explorers of a rival nation. At the end of the 15th century, Venice's wealth was built on its absolute monopoly on the spice trade. Europe had to buy its pepper and cinnamon from Venetian merchants at a high price. But for decades, the Kingdom of Portugal, under the guidance of figures like Prince Henry the Navigator, had been systematically investing in a different path. They sponsored voyages that pushed further and further down the unknown coast of Africa. They developed new, more resilient ships like the Caravel, designed to withstand the harsh Atlantic Ocean. Their goal was singular and obsessive: to find a direct sea route to the Indies and to break the Venetian monopoly forever. In 1488, the explorer Bartolotas finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving that the Indian Ocean could be reached. The path was open. A decade later, in the summer of 1497, A determined Portuguese captain named Vasco da Gama set out from Lisbon with 4 small ships to complete the mission. His journey was an epic of survival. He battled ferocious storms on the open Atlantic, lost many of his crew to scurvy, and fought his way past hostile traders in Africa, who saw him as a rival. Finally, after 10 grueling months at sea, his battered fleet dropped anchor in the port of Calicut, India, in May of 1498. He had done Italiano. For the first time, a European navigator had sailed from Europe to India. The news of Doma's successful return traveled slowly. First, as a rumor whispered in the marketplaces, then as a terrifying confirmed fact in diplomatic letters. When the news was finally made public in Venice, it was met with horror. The Venetian diarist Girolamo Prui wrote that it was the worst news the Republic could ever have received. The far-sighted merchants of the city understood the devastating implications. Their entire economic model was now obsolete. The Portuguese could ship spices directly to Lisbon for a fraction of the cost, shattering the foundation of Venetian wealth. The Republic did not surrender its position without a fight. They tried diplomacy, attempting to forge an alliance with the Sultan of Egypt to fight the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean. They even considered one of the most audacious engineering schemes of the age, to dig a canal at Suez to get their own fleet into the Red Sea. But it was too late. The world had fundamentally changed. Venice had not been defeated in a great battle. It had simply been bypassed. The world center of economic gravity was shifting from the familiar waters of the Mediterranean to the vast open expanses of the Atlantic. The Great Age of Discovery had ironically become the cause of Venice's long, slow, and irreversible decline. The foundation of Venice's immense wealth was crumbling, but the city would not collapse into ruin. Instead, faced with a world that no longer needed it as a marketplace, the Republic began a magnificent and final transformation. It decided that if it could no longer be the world's most powerful city, it would become its most beautiful, most captivating, and most entertaining one. As its political power slowly faded throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, its cultural power exploded. Venice became the essential destination on the Grand Tour. This was a rite of passage for wealthy young men from across Europe, especially from Britain. They journeyed to the continent to complete their education, and Venice was their playground. They came seeking not its commercial power, but its artistic treasures, its beautiful music, and its legendary reputation for sophisticated and decadent freedom, far from the rigid social rules of their home countries. The ultimate expression of this new identity was the famous Carnival of Venice. It was not a short festival, but a months-long season of public celebration and masquerade balls that took over the entire city. The central feature was the mask. Behind a simple papier-mâché mask, a nobleman could mingle with a commoner, and a commoner could feel like a king. The anonymity of the mask dissolved the city's rigid social structures. It created an atmosphere of intrigue, romance, and illicit adventure in the labyrinthine streets. This was the era when Venice became the undisputed capital of pleasure. The city opened the Western world's first public and legal gambling house, Here, under the watchful eyes of the state, masked aristocrats and wealthy travelers would risk entire fortunes in silent, high-stakes games of chance. It was also the golden age of the famous Venetian courtesans, highly educated and cultured women who were celebrated in art and poetry. And it was the birthplace of public opera, with magnificent theaters attracting the best singers and composers in the world. This final era was also a last brilliant golden age for Venetian art and music. It was the city of the composer, Antonio Vivaldi. His vibrant and energetic concept, many written for the all-female orchestra at the city's orphanage, became the soundtrack to this gilded age. It was also the city of the great viewpainter, Canalto. His breathtakingly detailed and sun-drenched paintings of the Grand Canal and St. Mark's Square were the ultimate souvenirs for the Grand Tour travelers. His work was so precise and evocative that it defined the world's image of Venice for centuries to come. As the 18th century drew to a close, Venice was a city of breathtaking beauty. It was also a city of profound political stagnation. The Republic was a living museum, a capital of pleasure, but its military was a shadow of its former self. Its ancient oligarchic government was ill-equipped to deal with the violent new forces that were about to be unleashed upon Europe. That new force was the French Revolution. Its instrument was a brilliant and utterly ruthless young general named Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1796, Napoleon's revolutionary army swept into northern Italy. It shattered the old Austrian order in a series of lightning-fast victories. The Republic of Venice, clinging to its long-held tradition of neutrality, desperately tried to stay out of the conflict. But in this new age of revolutionary warfare, there was no room for neutrality. Napoleon, having conquered the surrounding lands, accused Venice of being secretly hostile to France. He marched his armies to the very edge of the lagoon. For the first time in over 1,000 years, a hostile army stood at the shores of Venice. Napoleon issued a stark ultimatum to the Doge and the Great Council. They must dissolve their ancient government and establish a new democratic municipality aligned with France. If they refused, his army would be an Attila for the Venetian state. The threat was clear: surrender or face total destruction. The final agonizing debate took place within the Doge's palace. The ruling families of Venice were assembled in the Great Council chamber. Their faces were pale with fear. They knew the reality of their situation. Their small army was no match for Napoleon's hardened veterans. Their city was indefensible against modern artillery placed on the shore. They were faced with an impossible choice. They could make a heroic but suicidal last stand, which would see their magnificent city burned and looted, or they could accept a quiet, humiliating surrender that might at least preserve Venice itself. On May 12, 1797, the last Doge of Venice, Ludovico Manin, addressed the council with tears in his eyes. He told them that the Republic was finished. He urged them to accept the French terms. As the vote was being taken, the sound of a few musket shots from outside sent a wave of panic through the chamber, believing a revolt had begun, or that the French were already attacking. The noblemen voted in a rushed and undignified scramble. The 1,000-year-old Republic of Venice did not end with a roar of defiance. It ended with a whimper of fear. The final moments were filled with a profound and quiet sadness. Doge Ludovico Manin returned to his private apartments. He removed his ducal cap, the corner ducal, and handed it to his servant, saying simply, "Take it. I shall not be needing it again." A few days later, French troops entered Saint-Marc Square, the first time a foreign army had ever occupied the city. They looted its treasures. They took the 4 great bronze horses from the basilica and shipped them to Paris as spoils of war. The magnificent golden buster was publicly broken apart and burned for its gold. The surrender to Napoleon in 1797 marked the end of the 1,000-year-old Republic of Venice. The great political and military power was gone forever. For the next several decades, the city itself became a prize, passed between the empires of France and Austria before finally joining a newly unified Italy in 1866. But while the Venetian state was dead, the city and the idea of Venice remained. Its true legacy was no longer in its fleets or its colonies, but in the profound and lasting mark it had left upon the world. That legacy can still be found in the very language of modern finance and commerce. As the pioneers of international trade and early capitalism, the Venetians gave us many of the words we still use today. The word bank comes from the Italian banker, the simple bench a merchant would use in the square to conduct his business. Accounting terms like debit and credit were perfected in the ledger books of Venetian merchants. And, the word quarantine comes directly from their public health policy of isolating ships for 40 journey, or 40 days, a practice born from their constant struggle with the plagues that arrived on their trading ships. The most visible legacy, of course, is the city itself. To walk through Venice today is to walk through a living museum. To stand in St. Mark's Square is to be in the grand reception room of the Republic, surrounded by the glittering Byzantine-influenced mosaics of St. Mark's Basilica and the seat of 1,000 years of government in the Doge's Palace. From the palace, you can cross the famous Bridge of Sighs into the grim state prisons. You can still see the high red brick walls of the arsenal and imagine the thousands of workers who once launched a fleet in a day. You can stand on the iconic Rialto Bridge, the commercial heart of the empire. It is a city whose every stone tells a story, but to see the true scale of Venetian power, you must travel to its former colonies. The Trail of the Lion of St. Mark is carved into stone across the Mediterranean. At the farthest reach of their influence, the massive Venetian walls of Nicosia on Cyprus stood as the final eastern outpost. From there, the heart of their ion power was the crown jewel of their overseas empire, the island of Crete. In the beautiful port city of Ha, the entire old harbor is a complete Venetian creation. While in the capital, Heracleion, the colossal walls and seaside fortress are a testament to the centuries Venice spent defending its most precious colony. Moving back towards Venice, the Greek island of Corfu served as the heavily armed gateway to their home waters, its magnificent old and new fortresses still dominating the city. The trail continues north, up the Adriatic coast, into modern-day Croatia and Montenegro. The breathtaking fortifications of Kota and the defensive works of the very same city of Zara from our story showcase their absolute dominance of this coastline. These great fortresses of the sea are so significant that they are part of a grand UNESCO World Heritage Site called the Venetian Works of Defense. This same site also honors the fortifications of Venice's powerful land empire, the Stutodera. On the Italian mainland, the powerful walls of Bergamo still loom over the modern city. A 4-mile circuit of massive stone bastions and monumental gates encircling the entire historic hilltop town. At Bisceglie, Delgada, the Venetians transformed an island at the mouth of a river into a formidable pentagonal fortress, its powerful ramparts rising directly from the waters of the lake. And on the eastern frontier stands the incredible fortress city of Palmanova, a perfect 9-pointed star designed by the most brilliant military architects of the Renaissance. A stunning and complete example of a utopian city built as an ideal military machine. It is a final, powerful testament to Venice's need to fight and build on both land and sea. These are not just beautiful tourist sites. They are the enduring stone and marble echoes of a city that once commanded the sea. The powerful footprints of the line of St. Mark, still visible to any traveler who knows where to look. In the end, Venice's greatest legacy is its story. It is the story of a community born from fear and a place with no natural advantages that used its ingenuity, its political stability, and its ruthless focus on the sea to become one of the most powerful and influential states in the world. The Lion of St. Mark no longer rules a great maritime empire, but the spirit of the impossible city built on water, the most serene republic, continues to endure as a timeless testament to human resilience and ambition. And so, our story of Venice comes to a close. It has been a true pleasure to be your guide through the history of this unique and beautiful republic. Thank you for listening. Until our next journey into the past, I wish you a calm and peaceful night.